the connection that he has with that show, what they've developed, I have never seen. And we've sold a lot of shows over the years, and I've been in the podcast business for a decade plus, and I have never seen a show grow this quickly.
Artists, creative storytellers, filmmakers, protesters, activists, poets are using audio to tell stories.
I mean, these are beyond podcasts. These are cultural phenomenons that have fan bases the likes of which I've never seen. I've never seen fans as dedicated and as into content as this. So yeah, these are massive shows.
Hey, it's E.B. Moss, Head of Content Strategy for MediaVillage. The voices you just heard are some of the pros of podcasting. I thought it was important for you to hear exactly what's going on from the experts. I went to the West Coast Podfront, to the East Coast Rain and On Air Fest in New York City, and I talked to everyone from iHeart Podcast Network president to Stitcher's CEO to the head of PMM and the head of ad results, the head of Forever Dog, and even creators themselves. I think that it's important because, as Edison Research and Triton Digital just pointed out, 51% of the population has now ever listened to a podcast. That's a big jump. So it's really starting to get to critical mass, and brands and advertisers really need to understand what's new and what's next. Should they go behind a paywall? Should they do dynamic insertion? Should there be just more host reads? And why do the podcasters love their advertisers? So let's get some insights from even more in this part 2 of the pros of podcasting. I'm E.B. Moss for MediaVillage, which drives the business of media, marketing, and advertising forward through content by, for, and about thought leaders in ad tech and ad agencies, the audio space, and addressability, even those who are advancing diversity. So let's get some insights. Well, now I'm sitting down with Conal Byrne. Conal has been made president of the iHeart Podcast Network just after the acquisition by iHeart of Stuff Media. And it's pretty exciting times over there at iHeart Media because that represented such a new infusion of content and opportunities to really build things out. So I think you're going to want to hear what Conal has to say. He did a great job at today's Winter Podfront that we're at here in LA. So welcome, Conal. Thanks for sitting down with me.
Thank you. Thanks so much for talking to me.
Why don't you give me the elevator pitch of what you touched on today at the Podfront?
Sure. I think for us as Stuff Media, who were known publicly as How Stuff Works, for us who are already in our own right a pretty big podcast network, to be acquired by and become part of iHeart Media meant one thing very simply, which for us was totally game-changing. It was to be able to take what we thought was some of the best content being created, period, in the world, from Stuff You Should Know to Atlanta Monster to the Ron Burgundy podcast, and be able to now put that on the biggest stage in the world. iHeart Media reaches 9 out of 10 Americans a month. They do that through 850 plus radio stations, 20,000 plus live events that they program, and millions of social media followers. And so for them to basically come to us and say, we agree you guys are making some of the most riveting content in the world. Let's put that on the biggest stage in America. iHeart Media's platform was just a totally new move for us, but also I think candidly a game changer for the industry. So we launched a show a week ago called Family Secrets. Incredible show from best-selling author Danny Shapiro about all the sort of hidden things we don't tell each other as family members, but that ultimately come out. That show tonight will air its first episode on 113 broadcast radio stations in front of 500,000 people at 7 o'clock Eastern. That's the kind of stuff that a year ago I would have begged for that kind of exposure for a good creator, and now we have as par for the course.
What a great platform.
Yeah.
And so part of that is from the cross-pollination that's enabled from those radio stations and the built-in audience of iHeart and the amazing content that you guys are bringing to the table as well, and the
That's
talent.
Right. Yeah.
So also on the stage today, you had the host of Stuff You Missed in History Class.
Yeah.
Right.
Holly Fry.
It's getting like 8 million downloads.
Yeah, we're in a unique position at the iHeart Podcast Network because we have about 10 shows that are true juggernauts in our medium, meaning they drive anywhere from 5 to 25 million downloads a month.
Wow.
So shows like Stuff You Missed in History Class that you mentioned that Holly Fry hosts, she was on stage with us today, all the way through to Stuff You Should Know, which just passed 1 billion downloads to date. I mean, these are beyond podcasts. These are cultural phenomenons that have fan bases the likes of which I've never seen. I've never seen fans as dedicated and as into content as this. So yeah, these are massive shows.
It's exciting to be at an event like today when you hear about the change in numbers. I mentioned earlier that it kicked off with Tom Webster talking about the increase of share of ear, let's say. Now, his point, because I want to ask you a little bit about sponsorships and how you also cross-pollinate with the mothership of iHeart, but Tom Webster mentioned that while podcasting has doubled in listenership in 4 years, it actually represents a significant portion now of the opportunity for advertisers to come into the space. Because while a lot of people are listening to streaming services, Spotify, Pandora, etc., or they're streaming music, there's less opportunity to insert ads in those. But podcasting now owns a chunk of that opportunity. Yeah. What are you doing differently with podcasting at iHeart Podcast Network to support those sponsors?
The one thing that podcasting was missing was real scale. When you have a network that drives, like ours, 150 million downloads a month, that's a lot. Mm-hmm. But it still pales in comparison to the reach and scale of broadcast radio. So when iHeart says they reach 9 out of 10 Americans a month, that is scale. So for us to be able to take a show like Monster Season 2, which was the subsequent season, the follow-on season from Atlanta Monster, and distribute that across broadcast radio, that's great for the creators of the show. It's great for audiences because I think it's great content. It's also great for advertisers. It means that sponsors can carry their message across everywhere where that audio is heard. It starts as a podcast, but it's also distributed across hundreds of broadcast radio stations, cuming millions and millions of impressions. So to be very concrete about it, you end up with a media plan that you can offer advertisers with the scale that they need to reach the audiences they want that you can't as simply a podcast network.
Mm-hmm. You really moved the needle from the classic example we've talked about in podcasting for its first few years of only direct response advertisers.
That's right.
Now it's the big brand, even awareness campaigns.
That's right. So when we launched our latest number one hit is called the Ron Burgundy podcast with Will Ferrell. When we launched that show, the advertisers who come into it are brand advertisers, not necessarily DR advertisers.
So that brings up an interesting question. iHeart has a lot of very well-known broadcast personalities. A lot of them have made the move over to also have their own podcasts. How are they not only dealing with how advertising is executed in podcasting, but on that much more intimate relationship? Tell me about any trials, tribulations, or success stories of your radio personalities who are now, we'll call them audio.
Yeah, audio personalities. Yeah, it's a good, very, very good question. It is fascinating, frankly. iHeart has the single best roster of broadcast radio talent in the world, from Bobby Bones, who's the biggest country music DJ in America, to Charlemagne the God, who is essentially the anchor of the Breakfast Club show out of New York, to Ryan Seacrest, to Elvis Duran. The list goes on and on. The reasons for which they are attracted to the medium are the same reasons that Will Ferrell is attracted to the medium. It's a very fluid medium. There's a lot of creative freedom. It is a medium that wraps itself around your idea, as opposed to you having to cut to a clock. Someone like Bobby Bones is a great example, who launched effectively his own mini podcast network called the Nashville Network with 6 or 7 shows now. It lets him do all the stuff that you love about podcasting, explore topics long form, go into passions that he has, talk to super fan bases that he might not be able to do on the broadcast radio show that's blasted out to millions, right? But it hasn't been a hard sell to go to broadcast radio talent and say, there's a thing called podcasting. You should try it. Candidly, usually the answer is, yeah, I'm already going to launch one or two. So for me, it feels like a little bit of a kid in a candy store. You're talking to the biggest and best audio talent in the country who are already bought in.
And that brings us to another question, which is, what are you learning now working more with primarily what was a broadcasting company, and what chops did you have to acquire to accommodate the overarching iHeart Media company?
It's a totally different game. It's a totally different league when you're talking to the CMOs of big brands to broker very big overarching sponsorships that span podcast, broadcast, social, live events. The conversation's totally different. It's not to say that we weren't ready to have it. We were excited to have that conversation. That is why we wanted to get acquired by iHeart Media, but that's a change.
So speaking of inventory, there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of news around companies who are building subscription only or content behind the paywall, Spotify most famously for that. Do you think that will be necessary at something like the iHeart Podcast Network? Do you think that with your approach to business that you'll just keep regular insertion going?
Every stat you see about podcasting is a glass half full, glass half empty stat. So when I hear that 26% of Americans listen to a podcast in the last month, first I get really excited. It's a lot. But then I think of how long and far we have to go. And you don't want to cut off your nose to spite your face. You don't want to stop too early growing and assume that you can paywall up a lot of subscribers this early in a medium. I think it is wiser to make content available wherever people want to consume it for the next few years, and that's our philosophy.
Conal Byrne, thank you so much.
Thank you.
iHeart Podcast Network.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
So now we're here in New York at the RAIN Summit and had a great opportunity to speak with the man who kicked it all off, Zack Reneau-Wedeen. He's the head of the Google podcast division. Did I get that right?
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you had such interesting things to say about the state of podcasting, and the beginning of that was about how you're looking to tap into the 2 billion Android users and help them with discoverability and podcasting. Can you sum that up a little bit for us?
Yeah, so as we've continued to build podcasting products, one of the main areas that we see as a way to introduce people who haven't listened to podcasts before to the medium and bring them into the fold is Android. There are 2 billion Android users worldwide, and most of them aren't listening to podcasts today. So one thing that a lot of them are doing is searching on Google, reading what we call the Discover feed, which is a feed of stories, and using the Google Assistant. And so we feel like introducing them to podcasts through those media, the same way we introduce them to videos and articles and images, is a really helpful way to teach people about podcasts and also a good way to help grow the podcasting industry.
And before we go too much further, and there were some interesting things I want to ask you about, tell us how you got to this place at Google. Tell us about yourself, Zack.
Yeah, so I've been listening to podcasts since a long time ago. I think back when I was in high school, actually. I used to download podcasts for my drive to soccer practice. I had to drive about an hour and a half each way to and from the Chicago suburbs to play soccer. And I would download boring stuff like SAT prep. But then when I got to college, I discovered there were a lot more podcasts that were interesting to me as well. I remember Planet Money for economics was really interesting. And also, as I was learning to do computer programming, there were podcasts like Node Up was one about Node.js that was really compelling to me. And so I felt indebted to podcasts for a lot of what I'd learned. But then when I got to Google, it was around 2014, and podcasting had just started to take off in terms of the number, variety, and quality of options available. And so it branched out from first educational topics to also sports news, culture, and a variety of other things. And so we felt like at Google we had to with our mission to organize the world's information, make it universally accessible and useful, include audio information.
Beautiful. Now, that is one of the things that you said today at the RAIN Summit, was that the goal is to double worldwide listening of podcasting, right? So you have, I think you listed 4 things that sort of map out your strategy. What are those?
Yeah, so pretty much everything we do falls into one of 4 buckets, which are building a great listening experience, making it available everywhere you are on your various devices, the places you use Google, and around the world. Making it feel like it's built for you, using technologies like AI to build personalized recommendations and automatically transcribe podcasts, and also empowering publishers to create and sustain content and businesses for their listeners.
So on the last point, there's been a lot of discussion. We talked about this in part 1 of this episode. We talked about it last week at the West Coast Podfront about the whole issue with subscription and paywall. I know that Conal Byrne has a pretty specific POV about that. What's your feeling about content behind a paywall?
I think that right now podcasting is still kind of a new frontier. And it's really important to be experimenting with different business models and trying to help publishers find the best business model for them. So to give you an example, a podcast that has a few thousand listeners, where those listeners have a high willingness to pay for the podcast, it could be great to monetize directly. Whereas a podcast that might have millions of listeners who listen to it more casually might monetize better with ads. So our focus is not on promoting one business model over another, but rather helping different types of podcasters pick the business model that's best for them. And right now, the number 1 business model in the US is advertisement. And so we feel like a great way to help people grow is through expanding their reach and having the advertising scale with that. But in the future, we're definitely concerned with helping people monetize in the way that's best for them.
You did discuss something today that is just being announced in terms of search. How are you leveraging search now to improve discoverability and make it relate to the consumer wherever they are?
Yeah, so over the course of the week, we're rolling out a new feature in the Google Podcast app for Android, which is just including episode results in search. And that's not revolutionary in itself. But one thing that we're really excited about is that one of the signals that goes into the episode results is the transcript that we automatically generate text from speech, analyze it using technologies like Google's Knowledge Graph, and understand what's being talked about in the podcast. So it's kind of a small step forward in terms of the impact that it will have off the bat, but a really promising sign of the potential that we feel like is available through some of the AI technologies and speech to text that we can do at Google.
Thank you so much, Zach. That was great. So a few years ago, when I was full on in the radio business, the audio business, I had the pleasure of working with Scott Newman, who was the head of design at Cumulus, where we were, and I have the pleasure of seeing him again today. Scott!
Hi, Evie!
Yay! Scott, you're doing amazing things.
Thank you.
You are the founder or co-founder of an agency called Work by Work?
Correct, that's right. Work by Work is a storytelling and branding agency based in Brooklyn. We provide strategic, artistic, creative services to brands across different categories: culture, lifestyle, hospitality, tech, media. More and more, though, we have deeper roots in audio.
And really, you have run with that storytelling aspect. About 3 years ago, as I understand it, you started this thing that we're at today, the On Air Fest, and you called it the Work by Work Fest, I guess, then.
Right. It was called Work by Work On Air. It was really born out of my relationship with the hotel here, Wythe Hotel in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, in the cultural epicenter of Brooklyn and in New York. The owners had shared with me a vision that they had early on about having a radio station in the hotel, and their inspiration being pirate radio and the idea of being on the sea and starting a revolution, right? And real people talking to the people, and we drew a correlation.
I can hear you using your dulcet tones when you describe it.
I feel it, But like we drew like a really clear line to what was happening in podcasting. Like of course like bigger companies like found like a digital audio distribution mechanism that was viable. But like artists, creative storytellers, filmmakers, protesters, activists, poets are using audio to tell stories the way, revolutionaries were, grabbing like illegal airwaves and we like that. So we said, how can we use this amazing hotel and this amazing neighborhood and bring people into the community to do this? And so we just started programming like a event, and before we knew it, it was like a multi-room, multicultural, like very diverse, amazing festival. The On Air Fest brand is inspired directly by the On Air box, light box. So if you think about like in a radio studio or a television studio, you have the on-air box.
Oh, yeah. On air, flashing.
On air. And that means you're live and you're broadcasting. So we thought, what if our brand meant wherever you put that light box, that place becomes an active place for live amplification. So if you take the box and you put it in this room, in this neighborhood, what are the stories that come out of here? And as you can see, there are a ton of like amazing creative people, obviously in New York, in America, in this neighborhood. We've brought them all together. We activate like 5 or 6 different spaces within the hotel at different times. It's jam-packed this year, like you said, standing room, and it's really cool.
Scott, let's talk about sponsorships and podcasting. What have you seen in that space, and how easy has it been for you to attract sponsors to your festival?
The idea of an artist using audio to amplify their message is no different than, let's say, a brand using audio to tell their story. And as you know, podcasting is very popular right now, so everyone is interested. So we've been able to attract like marquee, cultural talent to come and tell their stories, and also bring in sponsor partners that want to participate.
And your branding is quasi-legendary. I mean, we just spoke to Eric Dean over at the West Coast Podfront, and I know that you worked on the rebrand, worked on the rebrand of Stitcher. So, hats off to you.
Thank you. We help them restructure their corporate organization, like from a corporate org chart strategic point of view. Our design director, Ray Marrero, led the design of a new logo and a system that's being rolled out like across advertising and campaign and website and their entire visual identity.
So it's all coming together for me now. I can see how you have both the design aesthetics, the audio aesthetics, the storytelling aesthetics, and you tie it all together, and it's work by work. Scott Newman, congratulations.
Thanks,
Great
Evie.
job.
So good to see you.
I grabbed the green room where David Raphael, who's the CEO of PMM, has hung out because he was a speaker today at the Winter Podfront. So David, I've known you for a few years now as we've been exposed to the podcast industry, and I just want to acknowledge that PMM, your recent rebrand of sorts, stands for Podcast Media Marketing.
When we had started the company, we had a very large and robust public radio portfolio, and as time went on, we continued to add a lot of entertainment shows, many that are celebrity hosted, Anna Faris's show, Joe Rogan's show, Dax Shepard's show, and a bunch of others like those that were here today, Tom Segura and Christina P. from Your Mom's House, and and Bert Kreischer from Bertcast. So it just came to a point where we had to look at what we were doing versus where we started and say this rebrand actually makes sense because it's far more representative of our portfolio.
And to be clear, you represent these shows as the advertising sales arm to them. You don't actually produce original content at this stage?
We are a rep firm, and that's what we've committed to do. What we have set ourselves up to be is a boutique agency to represent the biggest and best content out there in the podcast space for advertisers. And we have a very small and curated portfolio. That's by design. And the way that we sell, I think, is a little bit different than a lot of others, because what we try and do is find shows that meet each advertiser's needs. Now, does that mean that we sell one show to one advertiser? Not always. There's sometimes 8 shows that fit an advertiser's need, and we'll put those together for them. But lots of times it really is, who's the demographic? And we've tried to find in our portfolio a show to represent a variety of demographics. So when we go in to meet an advertiser or an ad agency, we can say, who are you trying to reach? And then say, well, great, the following handful of shows within our portfolio are the ideal fit for this advertiser.
Perfect. So first of all, I want to say Mazel Tov. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Hats off to you. Your suit has gotten nicer each year that I've met you.
Thank you. You're the only one who noticed my new suit. I appreciate that.
Well, I think that business must be pretty good, because podcasting is, really finding its footing.
Yeah.
And you were there sort of from the get-go.
Yeah.
And put a lot of faith in these shows that some had been scrappier than others, or you had a leaner, meaner portfolio now.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of your big shows a little bit more in depth.
Sure.
You know what I loved was you had a video with Dax Shepard today.
Yeah.
He couldn't be here, but he truly seemed remorseful.
He was.
In the video.
He really wanted to be here.
Because he really likes his podcast.
He loves this show. What he said in that video, for people that haven't seen it, was he said this is his favorite thing to do, and he genuinely means that.
And his show, by the way, is called Armchair Expert.
Correct. Yeah, and he really means that. Like the connection that he has with that show, what they've developed, I have never seen. And we've sold a lot of shows over the years, and I've been in the podcast business for a decade plus, and I have never seen a show grow this quickly. Like this show.
Can you talk numbers?
Yeah, I mean, we're over 1 million downloads an episode now, which is a very serious benchmark in this industry. It speaks wonders to Dax's ability to connect with his listeners.
Yeah.
And the show is touring right now. We've been to a number of the live shows as well, and they're selling out 3,000-4,000 seat venues in an hour.
Seriously.
And like that to me, the connection that he has with these fans, they are coming from great distances and short distances, but they're all coming to see him live.
Here's how Armchair Expert co-host Monica Padman described the thrill that it is to be a podcaster and why they love supporting the advertisers who support them.
We are always pinching ourselves. Last week, I think it was, we had singer-songwriter Norah Jones in to record, and she was playing the guitar and singing for us, and I looked at Dax, and he kind of had this sort of scared, sort of bewildered look on his face, and I was like, you are thinking the exact same thing as me. How is this our life? How is she sitting there? How is this our job? And the real answer is you. You are the reason it's our job. The agencies and the advertisers, thank you so much. You have turned this little dream, passion, hobby into a bona fide career, and we feel so lucky to have you guys on our team. And the ads are a real crucial part of our show. In fact, so much so that at one of our live shows, we do Q&As after, and there was a woman who stood up and asked us to do a ZipRecruiter ad for her. That was her request. That was her question.
And you have sort of a cool niche going, because Anna Faris also has a show that sort of offers up some advice.
Yeah.
And we trust her. She is really a voice for and to women in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah, no question. And she's all in on that channel, and one of the things that Anna has set aside is, she very quickly became one of the most influential female voices to have a show of scale. And one of the things that she set out to do, she said, I want to be a voice that can be heard. And one of the things that is an offshoot of that is they've started a number of other shows. I mean, we announced 5 shows today that are coming out under the Unqualified umbrella, 4 of them all hosted by women. With a female target audience. One of them hosted by Topher Grace, which is still probably going to skew female anyway. But again, it is very, very near and dear to her to make sure that we can have powerful female voices telling stories that are designed for women is something that we should all be thinking about and doing more of.
Yes.
And that's why Anna's all in on this.
And I like the fact also that Dax's show is called The Armchair Expert. Anna's is called Unqualified, and they both sort of weigh in on life situations and advice.
Yeah.
And we're just chatting with them, which implies the trust that people have in these personalities.
No question.
So how are you leveraging trust in selling advertising in podcasting? And then I want to ask you a part B in terms of like the whole issue with data and advertising and innovation in advertising in podcasting.
Yeah.
Discuss.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, to answer your first question, what makes those two shows that you mentioned, both Armchair Expert and Unqualified, connect so well with their listeners is how genuine the hosts are. And that actually goes to your second part as well. Dax, one of the reasons that show is so successful is because it's just so honest. Dax shows he's incredibly honest about himself, about his life, about his struggles, about his recovery, about, he shows vulnerability. And I think the fact that he is so unbelievably willing to overshare about his struggles and triumphs is what makes him so identifiable to everybody. And the same thing with Anna. Anna's incredibly honest. The person who you hear on Unqualified as the host of that show and her co-host Simsarna, like that's who they are, and because of that, they're able to show, here's who I am. I might be famous, but I'm also very similar to you.
Yeah.
And that connection is what works for the advertisers as well, because they get behind products, they personally use all of these products and services themselves, and because you and I can identify with them because they're talking about their lives, they're talking about themselves, they're talking about struggles and wins and losses, and because of that specific connection to the listeners, we do what they tell us to. We had a number of people say, I went out and tried Vital Farms Eggs, who was a sponsor in Dax's show, because Dax told me to.
And so what kind of proof points are you offering? Whose data are you offering up? How do you share those kinds of numbers through what?
Yeah, I mean, I think it varies a lot by show. We've had really good success, obviously in using some of the metrics that we have. The beta metrics from Apple have been useful to us and useful in a variety of unusual ways too. Some of them we found to be show structure. Like, oh, wait a second, this makes sense for us to put a break here, not here. And that has been really helpful just in terms of making sure the ads are effective. We do a lot of brand lift studies and audience surveys, and we found those metrics because we own them.
Yes.
It's good to get data. It's better to own data.
Yeah.
And when you
That's
have
what Amazon says.
But when you have the ability to own it and to design it, because when we do our own surveys, we can design them. I think there's a lot of questions about what podcast statistics mean. I'm happy and proud to be a member of the IAB Audio Committee, where we've defined some really important things universally for what the industry needs to do, and I think that'll lead to a lot of credibility for all of us. So I'm fully aligned and behind that. And I think there's some new tech that's coming into this space too that's going to allow all of us to take a much closer look at how campaigns work and what they do and mean for advertisers and listeners.
And what do you feel about the future opportunities for paywalled content? Do you think that will eat into any of the efforts of PMM? Are you bullish on it?
I mean, I sell ads. So we are 100% aligned with an ad-supported model, which goes back to the beginning of every form of media that's ever been commercialized. So I don't see that ending tomorrow, but I sell ads. So let's be very clear on that. But, I'm also really, I think there are going to be a lot of people who go behind paywalls. I think we're going to see that emerge. But I'm a little bit hesitant, and not just because it would change revenue structures and what it is that we do. I am because my biggest concern is do we as an industry have enough market share to start building walled gardens? And I think the answer today is no. That's my concern. I don't want to see this segmented. I want a free and open marketplace where we can all get the content that we want for free.
Well, that was a theme that actually you're repeating from some of the other guests that I interviewed today.
Okay,
So,
good. I'm glad we're
on
aligned.
the same
I did not
page.
talk to them ahead of time, but I'm glad we're aligned.
I want to leave it on a really cool note. One of the podcasts that really put podcasting on the map in the more recent years, as opposed to the original, Ira Glass days, was Serial.
Yeah.
And that, of course, has a well-deserved page in the Hall of Fame of podcasts. And we've had season 1, 2, and 3. I'm a huge fan, as millions of other people are.
Yeah.
But it's taking like a sort of brand extension. Is
Yeah,
that right? What
that
are
is
you
correct.
doing with it? Because
Yeah.
it's a really cool idea and very important.
Yeah, absolutely. So Serial season 3 was a really, in the way that only I think Serial can do, a very deep dive, groundbreaking look into the criminal justice system in the United States, specifically in Cleveland, and to drill that down a little bit into juvenile criminal detention. And that was a very, very huge undertaking that I think was exquisitely produced by Sarah Koenig and Julie Snyder and the team at Serial.
And may I say, terrifying reality.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And such, I mean, what I love about Serial is they tackle super important stories.
Yeah.
And one of the questions that the team at Serial had as they were producing this is looking at criminal juvenile detention. How do these kids end up here? And that was a question that they were asking, and a question that people who were listening to this series were asking. And the answer kept coming back to public education and public schools. So Serial is doing a limited run series coming out this fall that will take a look specifically, and it's a Serial Productions show. So this is not Serial season 4. It's a Serial Productions show hosted by Peabody Award winner Hannah Jaffe-Walt, who you may know from This American Life.
Yep.
Executive produced by Sarah Koenig and Julie Snyder. And what it will be is a very deep dive, close look into public education. And specifically one public school that has adopted every single public education policy reform for a century, and what that reform has meant, how that has worked, how it hasn't worked, and really what it means for the future of our kids and the future of our country. So it's a really important series that I think will be very well received, and that also, that I don't think anybody else has told this story. So that's what's going to be so unique about it.
So I love wrapping it up on that point, David, because that's such an important topic, and only podcasting can really get in your head and communicate in such that theater of a mind way that really makes us pay attention to social issues or make us laugh or anything like that. But with the public education topic, seems like that will also be a very sellable opportunity as more and more companies and brands want to align themselves with purpose and the right thing to do.
Definitely. So. No, we're seeing a lot of that, because there are a lot of brands who are looking to do more of an image campaign, more of a corporate social responsibility play, where they can say, here's who we are and here's what we stand for, which, I think podcasting on the whole hasn't offered that many opportunities, or we haven't been, really cognizant of the fact that we can until now.
Good. Well, on that note, it's been a really fun series of interviews here at the Winter Podcast Upfront, the first ever on the West Coast.
Yes, we're thrilled to be out here.
It was a really good show, and congratulations to everybody, and thanks for being here.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
I thought it would be fitting to wrap up this episode of Podcasting from the Pros POV with one of the original advertising pros of podcasting, Marshall Williams. He moved from, well, I'll let him tell you how he got started.
We started out as a radio company, and we found that endorsement radio, where the host of a morning show or afternoon show actually did a first person, I love this product, you should really try it, I've been using it for years, I sleep on this bed, was an extremely effective driver for results for our clients. We got to a point in time where we owned a significant amount of the available inventory in that vertical. And so we were looking to expand. The podcasting universe kind of fell on us, as oftentimes things do, where there was a economic downturn, 07-08, and some of our radio hosts got laid off. Adam Carolla was our first podcast ad. This would have been Mother's Day of 2010. And he was essentially doing his morning show. his radio morning show out of his garage, physically out of his garage. And without the FCC constraints, he could do what he wanted to. There was no linear time limit. It didn't have to be 60 minutes or whatever it was. It could be whatever he felt comfortable with. And so we started to advertise with him, and we didn't know what to expect, what to make of it. There was no pricing structure per se. We just kind of said, let's give this a try. And it blew us away.
Do you remember what the first advertiser was?
ProFlowers.
ProFlowers. Wow.
Yep. Mother's Day 2010. And it exceeded our expectations by a significant amount. So significant that we actually traveled out to California to meet with it and say, well, we're really onto something here.
So I'm sitting here with Marshall Williams, and obviously with that first question about how did his business evolve to be what it is today, one of the foremost media buyers of podcasting, places, 35% of...
Roughly.
Yeah, wow, amazing.
Now, radio's still an important part of our business, and it's still a meaningful part of our business. But most of our new clients are coming to us requesting podcast first.
What is a more recent success story that you can cite for us, Marshall?
We represent a lot of what you call disruptor companies that require somebody to explain what they do and how their process works and how their system works and why they like it. And that's why these baked-in host-read ads on podcasting are so great, because you'll have somebody who's like, I use this app on my phone, whether it be Robinhood, which is a recent success we've seen, or Policy Genius, which is an online site you can buy life insurance and a variety of other insurance categories through an app.
So we've been talking today here at the RAIN Summit about discoverability and the need to grow the worldwide listening audience. But as someone who wants to put money into podcasts on behalf of clients, what's the discoverability issue for you in terms of identifying and finding the right podcast and the rep firm for it?
Right. Discoverability can be a challenge. Most podcasts go through the Apple iTunes podcast app. That's roughly 60% of the ecosystem, 60 to 65% based on the last numbers. So we use that as a tool to help us discover podcasts. We're fortunate that we have some large presence with the investments our clients make. And so a lot of these podcasters reach out to us and say, we're creating new content. We've got a new series of our show coming out, or we have that kind of thing. So we tend to be one of the first movers.
So the people who are pitching you is one way to discover them yourselves.
We are constantly encouraging growth of content.
There's not too many already with 600,000 or so podcasts out there?
Gosh, cream rises to the top.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about how quickly a political show like Pod Save America has risen to the top of the charts. That show is 3 years old, not quite even 3 years old.
Yep.
Okay? And so as quickly as that, back in the radio days, it would take a much longer period of time to build an audience of that size.
It's not just a question of Cadence 13, which reps Pod Save America, calling on Marshall at ad results, but if you weren't a big agency like you were, and you were a smaller brand that wanted to advertise in that, how would they discover the right podcast to advertise in? Do you know Pod Search?
I have heard of Pod Search.
So that's the only tool I know of where you can drill down and actually find the rep or the producer.
Right. There is an issue with search in this space. I've always maintained that, everybody uses the $1 billion mark. When do we got to get to the $1 billion threshold? First of all, I think we need some more big deal content, some more, million download shows. We need to fix our discoverability, and I think a really good search engine will do that. And then I think international expansion is going to be another avenue. We've got a lot of clients who are like, there don't seem to be any borders with podcasting, like there are with terrestrial radio.
Right.
So we get a lot of requests for Australia, Canada, the UK, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so that's an area we hope to expand into, or will expand into in the near future.
Here at the conference at the RAIN Summit, we heard someone from NPR speak to the room and say, look, everyone in this room feels like, how come we're not at the $1 billion $100 mark yet, and we've been here for years, and look at the 600,000 podcasts. But to the consumer, it's still nascent. It's still new.
Absolutely.
And, you know, they say that the second you get tired of hearing the same message, then it's finally sinking in. So maybe podcasting is finally sinking in and starting to get more mainstream. But
Oh, no, I agree. Well, and I tell you what, there's still, as much as we know it and live in the space, and we obviously are aware of the shows that are doing great and listen to a lot of the content, there's still a huge universe of people who have heard the term podcast but don't really know what it is.
right.
And there's also another enormous group of people who are like, what's a podcast?
Yeah.
So there's still plenty of room for growth here. We're just getting out of the infancy phase. We're in the creeper phase, or the coming up on a toddler phase, to use the baby metaphor.
Well, but we're looking to you, Marshall, as our mentor, because you've been in it for how long now? That was 2000.
2010.
Yeah. All right.
So coming up on 9 years.
Yeah. So you're one of the guys who helped us put podcasting on the map, I think, by placing the belief in it and placing your clients' money in it. I mean, we owe you
I'm
a debt
flattered.
of gratitude.
I owe the same to my clients, because they're the ones who helped us get here. They're the ones who first of all, the medium really works. People listen, they're engaged, they respond. That's what makes it so great in our context, is because, you know, these people we used to say, oh, it made the phones ring. It was the old metaphor. Now people go to these websites and they buy product, and they say, I heard it on this podcast.
Yes.
And they do it by the millions, and that's what makes it so phenomenal. So I owe, you know, the industry's done a great job of creating very sticky, very thoughtful content that people listen to and engage with, and they respond to the ads. And our clients have embraced that. And that's really where the credit should lie, is our clients' understanding of the medium and how to use it and how much they want it to grow with us.
Well, I'm still going to call you the great evangelizer, and
I'm okay with that.
All right.
Because I do love this space. It's a phenomenal space, and I'm anxious for even more phenomenal content to come out there.
All right, Marshall Williams, Ad Results. Thank you so much.
Ibby, thank you.
All right, that wraps up part 2 of podcasting from the pros POV. And there's a lot more information and a lot more podcasting conferences coming up. We'll do our best to bring you some more insights from there. In the meantime, I want to thank you for listening, ask you to rate, review, subscribe, and I want to also thank Eric Klein for his amazing editing skills, as always. Take care and visit MediaVillage.com for more.